What if one man, armed with nothing but faith, could lead just 300 soldiers to crush an entire army that filled the valley like a swarm of locusts? Gideon was a young man living in ancient Israel. During this moment of upheaval, his life events unfold while the Hebrew people suffer with the consequences of their own terrible judgments. There was total devastation. The yoke of a merciless empire led once thriving communities to wither and bountiful fields to be abandoned. The Midianites, notorious for their harshness, had enslaved the Israelites for 7 years, making their lives a living nightmare. Gideon's existence was characterized by constant invasion. The continual fear of raiders who came rushing in like locusts and destroyed everything in their path kept him and his fellow people on edge. People were so ruthless as to steal crops that had been toiled for months, placing entire families at risk of starvation. A pervading sense of dread permeated every aspect of daily life. Many people took refuge in caves and mountains. In the aftermath of the Midianite conquest, many Israelites sought safety in these natural havens. They took refuge from their captors' watchful gaze among the rocks and shadows, attempting to preserve some remnants of their faith and culture. It was a risky existence, but many considered it as preferable to slavery or death. When Gideon was a young man, the stories of Israel's glorious past seemed like remote fairy tales. The exodus from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the capture of the Promised Land sounded like remnants of an ancient and distant time. Memories were hidden by the harsh realities of the present, leaving only a dreadful aftertaste of sadness and yearning. There was no reputation for mercy throughout the Midianite Empire. Mounted on swift camels, their army fell from the horizon like a sandstorm, spreading havoc wherever they went. Looting wasn't enough for them. The Israelites were humiliated and enslaved in every way possible as a result of their barbaric behavior. These merciless invaders crushed the pride of a once powerful people. Muffled cries and ardent prayers would interrupt the silence of Israeli nights. Why had God abandoned his chosen ones? Many people pondered. While some were overcome with shame, others realized that they had deviated from the right path as a result. Devastating ramifications strike the country, exposing the idolatry that has long seduced its people. Gideon was a bright spot in an otherwise bleak environment. His positivity and bravery shone through, despite his youth. Even though his faith wavered in the face of adversity, Gideon kept it alive, while many others gave up. He refused to totally bow to the Midianite yoke, which was both subtle and substantial. As he witnessed the sorrow unfolding around him, the young guy absorbed every detail of his people's subjection. Unconsciously, this strong awareness prepared him for the critical role he would later play. With each injustice he witnessed and every cry for aid he heard, he grew stronger and more aware of the need for change. Although they were weakened, the traditions and wisdom passed down from earlier generations were not completely ignored. The elders whispered tales of a free and prospering Israel to young people like Gideon around hidden campfires. These stories inspired the next generation with their relevance and promise. Fighting for one's life was a daily event for people living under Midianite rule. Many wins were scored with every grain of wheat hidden and every sheep rescued from intruders. Like many others, Gideon honed skills that will be essential in the future: alertness and caution. In a strange twist of fate, suffering produced a clever and hardy new generation. Period. As the years of tyranny went on, the Israelites began to feel a need for change. A few cautious murmurs of dissent started to emerge. Even though he was ignorant of his key role in the impending shift, Gideon's youthful vigor and excitement linked him inextricably to these ideas. Period. While reflecting as a nation, Israelites constantly reviewed the transgressions that had led to their current situation. They identified idolatry, social injustice, and a rejection of divine precepts as the primary causes of current misery. This necessary but painful self-criticism paved the way for the people's eventual spiritual and moral regeneration. Period. In addition to physical obstacles, Gideon and his fellow Israelites faced spiritual and emotional challenges. The unrelenting tyranny of a totalitarian society tested people's physical, mental, and spiritual endurance. Even though he had no knowledge of the tremendous fate that awaited him, the future leader was being shaped in this furnace of misery. Gideon was engaged in a routine yet dangerous occupation on what appeared to be a normal afternoon. While most people would use a winepress to crush grapes, he surreptitiously threshed wheat to avoid the Midianites. Prying eyes, this covert operation was carried out in an open field. The young man's precise and subtle motions revealed years of living in perpetual anxiety while working diligently. His concentration was broken by an odd figure. A glowing, undoubtedly extraterrestrial entity appeared directly in front of him. Its appearance was unexpected and remarkable. It was an angel sent by the Lord. The celestial envoy visited Gideon and hailed him a great hero in a voice heard throughout the cosmos. This young man was taken aback by these comments, delivered with divine power. Gideon's title was so unusual that he struggled to believe it. Who could ever call someone a hero if they considered themselves to be the lowest caste in their tribe? He was too intelligent to recognize the irony. Taking cover, scared of the oppressors, did not seem like a brave thing to do. Regardless of Gideon's doubts, the angel persevered. The divine messenger showed Gideon his calling with both severity and kindness. Save Israel from the persecution of the Midianite kings. He was selected. The endeavor appears enormous, an overwhelming burden for a young man raised in a repressive atmosphere. Gideon openly expressed his concerns and worries. How could a regular guy stand up to an empire? As they spoke, Gideon and the angel alternated between human trepidation and divine surety. Each of Gideon's questions elicited an acknowledgement of supernatural power and purpose. The angel informed the young guy that he would have a friend with him on his quest. He would be joined by the God of Israel, who would assure his victory over all obstacles. As the talk progressed, Gideon's behavior began to change gradually. After initially coming across as timid and terrified, his tone of speech gradually changed to one of inquiry and even cautious bravery. Though alarming, the heavenly calling was reawakening a long-buried sense of purpose within him. Gideon, ever humble, asked for confirmation that his unique calling was legitimate. This request, which was not intended to be an act of incredulity, demonstrated his cautious approach and the gravity of the situation. In reality, the angel was very accommodating to Gideon's request, which foreshadowed a miraculous show that would strengthen the young man's faith. Gideon's first opposition was more than just personal. It reflected an entire nation's worldview. The Israelites' deep wounds from years of suffering made it difficult for them to see a future free of their captors. Thus, Gideon's duty was to instill hope in a despairing population, as well as to lead a rebellion. Gideon realized the immensity of his assignment, and he began to comprehend how everything that had transpired up to that point, the hardships, the fears, the small victories, had led up to this moment. During his time under Midianite government, he developed a deep sense of empathy for his people's pain, as well as sharp intelligence and the ability to endure in the face of adversity. The winepress, which had just recently served as a hidden office, had now transformed into a makeshift shelter. In the midst of the day's dust and wheat grains, Gideon had an encounter that would change the direction of his life and the destiny of an entire nation. The young man saw a dramatic contrast between the ordinary surroundings and the gravity of the event. As Gideon came to terms with his calling, he began to pose more practical issues. To what end should he go? How should I begin? Gideon was urged to have active faith and be willing to follow heavenly direction step by step, as the patient and wise angel gave him the first instructions for the journey. The angel's final words before leaving conveyed a powerful lesson. Invest your strength in this. This puzzling remark seems to imply that Gideon's faith in the God who had called him was more essential than his physical might or strategic wisdom. 0.
He was given the opportunity to transcend his limits
And acknowledge the spiritual force at work inside him.
Shortly after the angel's departure, Gideon returned to the winepress alone,
but with a fresh perspective.
It was as if the half-threshed wheat all around him had been present, calmly witnessing the extraordinary meeting.
He was conscious that his life was about to alter dramatically, as his heart beat and ideas raced through his mind. His story, and Israel's as a whole, was about to take a positive turn.
Following his life-changing encounter with the angel,
Gideon was caught between belief and unbelief. He needed more proof, not because he didn't believe, but because he wanted to make certain he was on the right track. The mission's weight was huge.
In this spirit, he asked God for a sign, something tangible
to validate his faith. Gideon, who was growing wiser by the day, chose to investigate a wool fleece left out in the night dew, since it appeared difficult to manipulate. He prayed intently, expecting that God would affirm the sincerity of his mission if the fleece was soaked in the morning, but the surrounding land was dry. It was an outrageous but earnest request. Gideon watched anxiously as night fell on Israel. As the hours passed, each minute seemed to last forever. He imagined of waking up and seeing the sign he'd been looking for. Is it possible that God could provide such a clear and unmistakable answer? Patience and trust were tested throughout the wait. Gideon dashed to the location where he had hidden the fleece as soon as it became light. As he got closer, his heart raced. It was right there.
The ground around it was bone dry, but the fleece was soaked from the dew that had dropped throughout the night.
That is exactly what he had desired.
Gideon became emotional. It was a clear indicator, a sign from above, that he had been summoned. Gideon, on the other hand, considered that his prudential nature necessitated total assurance. He prayed to God with reverent audacity, requesting a second sign, this time to turn the tables on the situation. Even if the ground around it became wet, the fleece should remain dry. As doubtful as it was, the plea tested the limits of divine intervention. Be watchful and expectant as the darkness faded away once more. Gideon struggled to sleep because he was so concerned about what lay ahead. He considered the road ahead and the hurdles he would undoubtedly face. The second sign strengthened my resolve to confront the challenges ahead, while also confirming my doubts. Gideon dashed to the fleece's location as soon as the sun appeared. His jaw dropped at the sight. It appeared like it had rained all night on the ground, yet the fleece was completely dry. Clearly, God's power and presence were demonstrated in this extraordinary event. Gideon was tremendously moved by these two miraculous signs. They weren't merely coincidences or magic tricks. They were concrete representations of celestial force aiming directly at him. His calling, which had before been purely theoretical, now appeared palpable and obvious. The fleece, a commonplace object from pastoral life, has become a powerful symbol of God's covenant with his anointed. Gideon understood that the supernatural can often take the guise of everyday objects, elevating the mundane to the sublime. Gideon learned an important lesson about faith and confirmation from his meeting with the fleece. He learned that seeking spiritual counsel demonstrated strength, not weakness. By slowly and sweetly answering Gideon's pleas, God displayed his readiness to connect with him in ways he could understand and accept. In addition to giving Gideon with personal assurance, these miracles served as impetus for future wars. During times of uncertainty or concern, he may recall these messages as real evidence of divine support. A miraculous fleece immediately became known among the Israelites who lived around Gideon. Such hints were like a beacon of light in the dark for a beleaguered and despairing populace. Many people's faith, which had gone cold, rekindled as they considered the idea that God was still in touch with them and concerned about their situation. Gideon interpreted the fleece miracles as a sign that a new era was about to begin. He had progressed beyond being Joash's captivity-evading kid, a man chosen by God to lead his people to freedom. He now served a divine purpose. Surprisingly, these clues helped to confirm the personal transformation that had begun with the angel's invitation. Perseverance and faith were also highlighted in the fleece episode. Gideon sought more than one sign to confirm his suspicions. His guarded demeanor disguised his determination to establish a solid foundation for the next expedition. As Gideon reflected on the incredible events, he realized that his adventure was only beginning. The heavenly signs kicked off a vast, epic drama that altered the course of Israel's history. Armed with a spirit of fearlessness and refocused resolution, he prepared for the challenges that lied ahead, confident that the God who had heard his prayers with such incredible generosity would guide him. With God's assurance boosting his determination, Gideon set out on the tough task of collecting an army. Things seemed gloomy. Many Israelites were scared to confront the powerful Midianites because their morale had been weakened by years of oppression. Nonetheless, news of the miraculous indications circulated swiftly, attracting rebels eager to fight for independence. Initially, a significant number of men responded to Gideon's invitation. A great number of individuals were ready to face the enemy. The sight of so many of his fellow countrymen gathered, ready to give their lives for the cause, inspired the newly appointed leader with both pride and anxiety. Finally, Israel appeared to be able to stand up to its oppressors. On the other hand, heavenly goals were separate. Surprisingly, God commanded Gideon to reduce the size of his army. This ranking was based on clear reasons. God, not Israel's military prowess, gets all credit for the victory. This directive put Gideon in a catch-22 situation. How may a smaller force become successful in a conflict? What ensued was a fascinating and eye-opening selecting process. Gideon was to observe the men while they drank from a creek. Only those who stood up straight and held water to their lips while remaining alert were chosen. Those who knelt to drink were excluded. The army was reduced to 300 warriors in this unusual manner. Everyone involved, including Gideon, had to put their faith to the test when the army was reduced to such a small size. Despite being outnumbered by their foe, the 300 chosen men surely felt a sense of responsibility. The significance of each man's role was paramount, and they were all aware that the fight ahead would be nothing short of magnificent. With this small but determined company under his command, Gideon faced the difficult challenge of psychologically and physically preparing his warriors for battle. He reinforced the idea that they were on a holy mission by informing them about his contacts with otherworldly messages. Belief in God's promise provided the foundation for this unlikely army. According to standard military doctrine, the Midianite hordes were too powerful for such a small force to defeat. Nonetheless, Gideon and his army were aware that they faced opposition in this struggle. The divine prospect of success fueled their crazy bravery. The battle preparations were unlike any that had come before. Gideon prioritized the unity and strengthening of his little group's faith over training in traditional battle techniques. Everyone was encouraged to have faith in God's plan and see beyond their own limitations. The unusual technique brought the warriors closer together because they were all dedicated to a greater cause. As the showdown approached, Gideon was forced to confront his own concerns and uncertainties. It was a tremendous responsibility to command 300 soldiers against a much larger army. However, the signs he remembered and the faith his followers had in him gave him courage. The Midianite spies were well aware that a small army had been formed when word spread of a tiny group of Israelis preparing for action. The enemy camp must have laughed and mocked. They had no notion that this seeming discrepancy in strength was actually an important part of God's plan. Gideon gathered his men for one last set of drills the night before the battle. He emphasized that they had all been handpicked for this exact moment and reiterated the divine promise of victory. The Israeli leader recognized that his army's unwavering faith in God was more vital than sheer numbers. The massive Midianite army stood in sharp contrast to Gideon's small troop. One side depicts 300 men who are strengthened by unshakable faith and the heavenly promise. Thousands of experienced combatants, on the other hand, feel confident in their numerical and tactical advantages. An unusual and exceedingly unlikely fight was about to begin. As the 300 prepared for the impending conflict, they were filled with both excitement and worry. Every man knew he was about to take part in something much bigger than a typical combat. A holy promise had been fulfilled, and this was an opportunity to witness God's power at work. With God's assurance boosting his determination, Gideon set out on the tough task of collecting an army. Things seemed gloomy. Many Israelites were scared to confront the powerful Midianites because their morale had been weakened by years of oppression. Nonetheless, news of the miraculous indications circulated swiftly, attracting rebels eager to fight for independence. Initially, a significant number of men responded to Gideon's invitation. The number of those ready to engage the enemy was in the thousands. Seeing so many fellow citizens gathered, ready to give their lives for the cause, inspired the newly elected leader with both pride and anxiety. Finally, Israel appeared to be able to stand up to its oppressors. On the other hand, heavenly goals were separate. Surprisingly, God commanded Gideon to reduce the size of his army. This ranking was based on clear reasons. God, not Israel's military prowess, gets all credit for the victory. This directive put Gideon in a catch-22 situation. How may a smaller force become successful in a conflict? What ensued was a fascinating and eye-opening selecting process. Gideon was to observe the men while they drank from a creek. Only those who stood up straight and held water to their lips while remaining alert were chosen. Those who knelt to drink were excluded. This unusual method reduced the army to a mere 300 troops. Everyone involved, including Gideon, had to put their faith to the test when the army was reduced to such a small size. The 300 chosen must have felt a sense of obligation because they faced a massive numerical disadvantage. The upcoming conflict was going to be out of this world, and every guy present knew it. Gideon, who now led a small but resolute band, faced the difficult challenge of emotionally and physically training his people. He reinforced the idea that they were on a holy mission by informing them about his contacts with otherworldly messages. This seemingly inconceivable army was built on the foundation of confidence in God's promises. According to standard military doctrine, the Midianite hordes were too powerful for such a small force to defeat. Nonetheless, Gideon and his army were aware that they faced opposition in this struggle. The divine prospect of success fueled their crazy bravery. The battle preparations were unlike any that had come before. Gideon prioritized his small group's faith and unity over training in standard battle techniques. Everyone was encouraged to have faith in God's plan and see beyond their own limitations. The unusual technique brought the warriors closer together because they were all dedicated to a greater cause. As the showdown approached, Gideon was forced to confront his own concerns and uncertainties. It was a tremendous responsibility to command 300 soldiers against a much larger army. However, recalling the celestial hints and the faith his followers had in him gave him courage. The Midianite spies were well aware that a small army had been formed. When word spread of a tiny group of Israelis preparing for action, the enemy camp must have laughed and mocked. They had no notion that this seeming discrepancy in strength was actually an important part of God's plan. Gideon gathered his men for one last set of drills the night before the battle. He emphasized that they had all been hand-picked for this exact moment, and reiterated the divine promise of victory. The Israelite leader recognized that his army's greatest asset was its unwavering faith in God, not its sheer numbers. The massive Midianite army stood in sharp contrast to Gideon's small troop. One side depicts 300 men who are strengthened by unshakable faith and the heavenly promise. Thousands of experienced combatants, on the other hand, feel confident in their numerical and tactical advantages. An unusual and exceedingly unlikely fight was about to begin. As the 300 prepared for the impending conflict, they were filled with both excitement and worry. Every man knew he was about to take part in something much bigger than a typical combat. A holy promise had been fulfilled, and this was an opportunity to witness God's power at work. Gideon crept up on the Midianite camp at night with 300 of his followers. The mood was full of anticipation and suspense. In addition to regular weapons, each Israeli soldier carried a clay jar, torch, trumpet, and other unusual items. This unusual combination would be the foundation of an unexpectedly successful approach. Gideon divided his army into 3 100-man companies in compliance with a divine command. They formed a circle and positioned themselves carefully around the large enemy camp. The plan was brilliantly simple. At Gideon's signal, the jars would be broken, the concealed candles revealed, the trumpets blown, and everyone would exclaim in unison, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." It was time to take action. The silence of the night was disturbed abruptly by Gideon's motion. The valley resonated with the tremendous smash of hundreds of jars breaking at the same time. Suddenly, a ring of bright lights encircled the Midianite camp, and the sound of blasting trumpets and war cries filled the air. It had a devastating and immediate impact. The Midianites awoke to an intense sensation of horror. A wave of uncertainty poured across the camp. The darkness prevented them from determining the real magnitude of the onslaught. The lights and clamor made it appear as if a far larger force was surrounding them from all sides. As a result of the mayhem, the Midianites began fighting among themselves. They couldn't distinguish who was friend and who was foe in the confusion and darkness, so they began fighting. The camp, once a bastion, is now a place of turmoil and destruction. The overwhelming enemy army fell before Gideon and his men's eyes, leaving them in awe. Worry grew rapidly as the night proceeded. In their haste to flee, some Midianites injured themselves or were crushed underfoot by their own followers. Some people fled, abandoning their firearms, food, and belongings. What began as a harmless diversion technique had evolved into a decisive setback for the foe.
As the importance of the victory became evident to Gideon, he directed his warriors to stay there and maintain the noise and lighting. Because of their tenacity, the Midianites were unable to reorganize or realize the entire scope of the Israeli army's power. Until the break of day, the impression of a massive siege remained.
The gravity of the victory became clear as morning neared. Once home to a formidable army, the valley had become a barren wasteland of ruined machinery and lifeless bodies. Not only did the few Midianites who managed to escape flee in complete confusion, but they also carried their mythical invincibility with them. Word of the amazing victory spread quickly throughout Israel. The Midianites were pursued by tribes that had previously been reluctant to support the cause. From an apparently impossible mission with only 300 soldiers, a freedom movement swept the country. Gideon, being wise, recognized that his victory was owing more to an obvious show of divine power than to his plan or his soldiers' valor. He exhorted his disciples to glorify God, claiming that their faith and obedience to God's commands were the keys to their surprising victory. Defeating the Midianites was a mental and physical achievement. A single night erased years of terror and persecution. After years of captivity, the Israelites suddenly felt like champions, prepared to face any challenge with God's help. The consequences of this conflict extended far beyond Israel's borders. The Israelites' transition from a weak and downtrodden people to a powerful and fearsome nation generated both admiration and fear in their neighbors. The story of Gideon's 300 men and their great triumph became legendary, inspiring future generations. The Midianites' swift retreat left behind massive treasure. After his people had suffered financially for years at the hands of their oppressors, Gideon ensured that everyone received what they earned. Many saw this windfall as an additional blessing from above, a concrete proof of the redemption God had promised. Gideon's success came after a personal journey of faith and redemption. The previously modest young guy who hid among the wheat is now regarded as a mythical savior and leader. But he kept his pride in check, constantly emphasizing that God was the source of his power. This battle's unique tactics demonstrated how important it is to obey God's will, even if it contradicts common sense. Gideon's victory against seemingly insurmountable obstacles revealed the strength of faith and obedience. Gideon became Israel's darling after his amazing victory against the Midianites. After gaining their long-awaited liberation and being inspired by Gideon's leadership, the people requested a significant shift in control. An overwhelming number of people chanted in unison, asking that Gideon be made king over them and their descendants, therefore establishing a dynasty. In the face of this attractive proposition, Gideon demonstrated excellent judgment and humility. "I will not govern you, nor will my son," he stated emphatically as he rejected the crown. "You will be governed by the Lord." This remark displayed a profound understanding of the true underpinning of Israeli leadership and power, going beyond a simple display of personal modesty. Gideon saw that he was never a sovereign in his own right, but rather an instrument in God's hands. The people learned a valuable lesson from Gideon's hesitation to become king. It restated the fundamental premise of Israelite theocracy, namely that God was the nation's lawful ruler. This decision preserved the social and theological structure that had distinguished the Israelites since Moses' day, allowing Israel to avoid becoming a monarchy for the time being. Nonetheless, Gideon was no dummy. Even the most experienced leaders are imperfect. He then urged the people to return the gold earrings stolen from his enemies after he declined the crown. Gideon made an ephod, a sacred garment worn by priests to seek guidance from above, out of this valuable metal. His intentions may have been good. He may have wanted to find a means to speak with God on a personal level. Ironically, Israel fell into a spiritual trap as a result of this ephod, which was intended to exalt God. People began to idolize the item too much, diverting their attention away from God in the process. What began as a symbol of devotion evolved into an idol, driving many people away from the Lord's ways. The ephod's narrative offers a powerful warning about the dangers of hidden idolatry. Things intended to be worshipful to God can quickly become idols in their own right. This lesson is extremely relevant because it highlights how easily positive intentions can result in unintended negative effects. The ephod episode highlights how multifaceted people are. Gideon, who had before demonstrated tremendous faith and intelligence, now led the people astray. This is a cautionary tale about how even revered and well-intentioned leaders can make mistakes, especially when they deviate from specific divine instructions. Despite this blunder, the remainder of Gideon's legacy was positive. Israel had 40 years of peace, extraordinary wealth, and serenity under his rule. His leadership was effective, and his victory over the Midianites had long-term effects, as this time of stability demonstrated. Gideon's life teaches us valuable leadership skills. He demonstrates how God can use ordinary people to do extraordinary things, by converting him from a bashful youth to a confident leader. However, his flaws tell us that we must be attentive and always look to God for guidance. The ephod's building and rejection of the crown serve as contrasts that demonstrate how difficult leadership decisions can be. While Gideon was correct in resisting unchecked political authority, he made a mistake by making an idol out of an innocent thing. This demonstrates that even the most spiritually driven choices can result in unforeseen and detrimental consequences. The moral of Gideon's story is to keep your pride in check, no matter how high you climb the ladder of success. Although it is admirable that he first declined to become king, his subsequent choice to build the ephod suggests that he may have succumbed to an inflated sense of spiritual significance. The dangers of hubris and narcissism are warned about for leaders throughout history. Gideon's actions had far-reaching consequences for the future. Despite the fact that his military victory brought peace and prosperity, the ephod event laid the groundwork for future spiritual conflicts in Israel. This demonstrates how leaders' actions may affect generations after they die. Gideon's story also explores faith and obedience. As he progresses from ambiguity to certainty, he demonstrates how faith may evolve in the face of adversity and divine revelation. Having said that, the ephod narrative suggests that even after seeing great miracles, it may be a constant effort to keep that faith pure and focused. A solid finish is essential, and the story of Gideon is a fantastic example of this. Despite his brilliant leadership and amazing victories, the ephod's blunder tainted his legacy. This emphasizes the need of remaining persistent and alert in one's spiritual life, especially for those in positions of control and influence. What are your plans in light of this new knowledge? How will you proceed, given what you've learned from Gideon's experience? You, like Gideon, have a specific calling to lead your people to deliverance. Why wait any longer to discover and accomplish your life's purpose? Take action today. The adventures of Gideon do not end with the annals of antiquity. People who are prepared to speak up, show faith, and take risky measures are the ones that secure its survival. Have you prepared to go on to the next chapter? Keep this motivation going. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about profound teachings, please subscribe and activate notifications. If we work together, we may learn from our leaders' failures
and use that information to our own success in the future. A new chapter in your journey of self-discovery and growth has begun.